100 men. White robes. Torches. Rifles. Riding out in the dead of night, certain of what they were about to do. They'd done it before. In 1931. In 1944. In 1953. And every time nobody stopped them. So when they pulled up to Roy George's gate that October night and cut the chain, they weren't scared. They were laughing. Because all they saw was a big, quiet black man alone on a ranch with nobody coming to save him. What they didn't see was the Springfield rifle. The 7 prepared positions. The man who'd been waiting for them for years. They came 100 strong before midnight. Before daybreak, not one of them would ever underestimate a quiet man again. This is the story of Roy George. The deadliest shooter in the South and the last night anyone came for his land. Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. If you enjoy our video, encourage us to post more by liking the video, comment where you are watching from, share it with someone and make sure to subscribe for more. The Georgia night smelled like pine resin and red clay, the kind of thick southern air that sat heavy on your chest like a wool blanket soaked in creek water. Stars punched through the black sky over Calhoun County, and the crickets sang their endless, mindless song, the sound of a land that did not care who lived or died upon it. Roy George's ranch stretched across 412 acres of the finest bottom land in the county. Everybody knew it. That was the problem. The main house sat on a slight rise at the center of the property, a 2-story structure of hand-hewn pine and river stone that Roy had built himself, board by board, over 6 years. Behind it ran a long red barn, a smokehouse, a tool shed reinforced with iron brackets, a chicken coop, 2 water towers, and a network of fenced pastures where 63 head of prime black Angus cattle grazed in rotating shifts. There were pecan orchards to the east. A catfish pond fed by an underground spring to the west. Rows of sugarcane that looked, at first light, like a green ocean rippling in slow motion. Roy George had built something. Something real. Something that lasted. He was 51 years old, built like 2 men stacked sideways, 6 feet 2 inches tall, 260 pounds, with forearms the diameter of fence posts and hands so large they could palm a watermelon with one grip. His face was broad and dark as good earth, weathered deep by decades of outdoor work, with calm brown eyes that people often described, uneasily, as too still. Like water with no bottom. Like a man who had already seen everything and decided none of it surprised him. He had served 3 years in the United States Army during the Second Great War, assigned as a sharpshooter in a segregated unit, the kind that did twice the work for half the credit and still came home to a country that didn't want them. He'd fought in the Pacific and in North Africa. He had put bullets through targets that other men couldn't even see. His commanding officer, a white colonel from Tennessee named Harcourt, had written in Roy's discharge papers, "The finest marksman I have encountered in 22 years of military service. Instinct, precision, patience, a rare and complete combination." Roy had folded that paper and tucked it in a Bible and never showed it to anyone. He didn't talk about the war. He didn't talk about his shooting. He kept to himself, traded fairly at market, paid his debts, kept his fences mended, raised 2 daughters who were now grown and gone to Atlanta, and asked nothing from the world but to be left alone on his land. The land his grandfather had scratched out of nothing after emancipation. The land his father had defended with a shotgun in 1919 when night riders came. The land that Roy had doubled, then tripled in size through decades of work, smart trading, and the kind of discipline that most men black or white simply did not possess. He was not a man who looked for trouble. But he had always been ready for it. The trouble had been building for 3 months. It started when Roy outbid a white landowner named Curtis Brame for the 200 acres that bordered Roy's eastern fence line. Brame had been certain the auction was his, had told half the county it was his and had shown up to find Roy George standing at the county clerk's office with a certified check and a quiet expression. Brame had gone red in the face. Had said things that the clerk later said she couldn't repeat in polite company. Roy had taken his deed, tipped his hat, and driven home. The Calhoun County Citizens Council, what most people just called the Klan when they were being honest, did not appreciate Roy George's continued success. He was, in their telling, getting too big. Too comfortable. Forgetting his place. Curtis Brame was a member. So was the county sheriff, Earl Denton. So was the judge. So were 2 of the 3 aldermen. The interlocking network of white power in Calhoun County was not subtle, and it was not gentle, and it had destroyed black men before. They believed it would destroy Roy George too. The decision was made on a Wednesday evening in the back room of Brame's hardware store, over bourbon and low voices. 100 men. They would come on Saturday, the last Saturday of October, when the nights ran longest. They would come robed and hooded. They would burn the fields first, drive off the cattle, burn the barn, burn the house. If Roy George ran, they'd let him run, stripped of everything, broken, an example. If he didn't run well. The county coroner was also a member. They had done this before. In 1931. In 1944. In 1953. Each time to a different black family. Each time with no consequence beyond a few filed reports that Sheriff Denton quietly buried. None of them, not one of the 100 men who gathered in that back room and raised their glasses, had ever heard of Roy George's military record. Had never asked. Had never considered that the large, quiet black farmer who kept to himself might have reasons for his quietness beyond simple docility. They saw a fat man on a big piece of land. They did not see the shooter. This was their only mistake. It was also their last. Roy George didn't sleep on Friday night. He hadn't slept on Thursday night either, because Thursday morning, a young black boy named Cornelius, 13 years old, worked in Brame's hardware store sweeping floors, had pedaled his bicycle 4 miles down the dirt road to Roy's gate and knocked 3 times, fast, the way scared people knock. Roy had opened the door, looked at the boy's face, and knew immediately that the news was serious. He'd sat Cornelius down at the kitchen table, given him cold water and cornbread, and listened without interrupting as the boy described everything he'd heard through the thin wall of that back room. The night. The number. The plan. When Cornelius finished, Roy sat still for a long moment. His big hands rested flat on the table. His face showed nothing, no fear, no anger, no agitation. Then he said, "You did right, son. You go home. Don't come near this place for 2 weeks. Don't talk to anybody about what you told me. You understand?" Cornelius nodded. He was scared. He was also, somehow, not as scared as he'd been when he arrived. There was something in Roy George's stillness that transferred itself to others, a deep, bedrock calm that said, "I have calculated this, and I am not afraid." Roy gave him $3 and watched him pedal back down the road. Then Roy George went to work. He spent Friday doing things methodically, in a precise order, the way a man works when he has done a great deal of thinking beforehand and needs only to execute. First, he moved his cattle. Drove all 63 head to the far north pasture, beyond the creek, where they'd be clear of whatever fire came. It took him 4 hours. Second, he retrieved 4 wooden crates from beneath the floor of the tool shed, lifting the hinged panel that looked like ordinary planking. The crates had been there for years, packed in oilcloth, maintained with obsessive care on the first Sunday of every month, the way other men maintained their Bibles or their bank ledgers. Inside the crates, 6 rifles. 3 lever-action Winchester Model 94s in .30-30 Winchester. 2 Browning automatic rifles, military issue, acquired through channels Roy had never discussed with anyone, and 1 Springfield M1903A4 sniper rifle with a Weaver 330 scope, the rifle he had carried through the Pacific. The rifle with 27 confirmed kills on its record, the rifle Roy had cleaned and oiled every 30 days for the past 20 years as a matter of principle. He also had 4 Colt 1911 pistols in .45 ACP. A short-barreled Winchester Model 12 shotgun for close work and enough ammunition in organized, labeled boxes to make the entire exercise last a very long time. Third, he walked his property. He walked it slowly, with the eyes of a soldier, not a farmer seeing the land as terrain instead of home. He noted fields of fire and cover. Angles of approach. Natural choke points. The way the moonlight would fall after midnight when it cleared the tree line to the southeast. The shadows cast by the water towers. The depressions in the earth near the orchard that a man could slide into and disappear. Roy George had never stopped thinking like a soldier. He had just not had occasion to act like one since 1945. He marked 7 positions on his property, positions he had identified years ago, casually, the way a chess player identifies the board before the game begins. He had never told his daughters about those positions. Had never told anyone. He had simply known, from the day he moved back to Calhoun County, that a day might come when the land would need defending the way his father had defended it, and his grandfather before that, except this time with considerably more firepower. He prepped each position. Dug shallow scrapes in 2 of them where the ground allowed. Stocked each position with a weapon and ammunition. Calculated distances to likely approach paths. Cut certain fence sections so he could move between positions in darkness without noise. He ate a large meal at sunset, pork chops, collard greens, sweet potato, cornbread, and made coffee, strong and black. He sat on his porch and watched the dark come in over his land, over his orchards and his pastures and the creek that caught starlight like broken glass, and he felt something that was not quite sadness and not quite anger but lived somewhere between them. He had not wanted this. He had never wanted this. But he was ready. At 8 o'clock he turned off every lamp in the house. Then he took his position. They came at midnight. Roy heard them before he saw them, the low rumble of truck engines on the county road, more trucks than you'd expect, and the particular silence that follows when engines are cut and men pour out into darkness trying to be quiet and failing at it the way large groups of men always fail, shuffling and whispering and the occasional metallic clink of an object against another object. From his first position prone in the shallow scrape behind the eastern fence line, screened by tall grass and the shadow of the pecan trees, Roy watched them assemble at his gate. 100 men in white robes and hoods. They carried torches, unlit. Rifles and shotguns. 3 men in the front carried a large wooden cross, already soaked in kerosene. 6 men had cans of fuel. The man directing traffic was large and moved with authority. Roy recognized the shape of Curtis Brame even under the robes. Brame had a distinctive rolling walk, the walk of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Roy watched them cut his front gate chain. Watched them pour onto his property in a spreading mass, confident and loud now, spreading out across the front field with torch-bearers at the flanks. He heard laughter. Heard someone say something that drew a coarse response from the men nearby. 100 men. They thought this would be easy. Roy George put his eye to the Weaver scope on his Springfield and measured the night with the calm, unhurried patience of a man who understood that time, properly used, was the deadliest weapon available. He let them get settled. Let them spread. Let them light the torches. He wanted them committed. Inside the property. No easy retreat back to the road without crossing a long stretch of open ground. He waited. The wooden cross went up in the front field, 60 yards from his house, blazing orange and tall. In its light, Roy could see them clearly, 100 white-robed figures moving across his land, and in that moment something settled inside him that had no name in ordinary language, a cold, absolute clarity, the same state he had entered in the Pacific in 1943 when everything stopped being complicated and became simply a matter of geometry and patience. He exhaled slowly. He squeezed the trigger. The first shot crossed 400 yards of Georgia night and found the man holding one of the fuel cans. The second shot followed so quickly that witnesses, if there had been any neutral witnesses, which there were not, might have thought there were 2 shooters. Roy cycled the bolt with the fluid economy of long practice. The night exploded. Not in the way the Klan had planned, the controlled, triumphant explosion of burning fields and breaking wood. It exploded in the way of confusion and terror, in the way of men who had come to commit violence discovering that violence had already found them, had in fact been waiting for them, had been watching them assemble and had selected among them with a precision they could not comprehend. They fired back. Of course they did. They fired at the muzzle flash, which was already gone, because Roy George understood muzzle flash and had moved the moment he fired his second shot, rolling left, pushing through the gap in the fence he'd cut that afternoon, low and fast for a big man, moving through the dark like he'd been born to it because, in a certain sense, he had. Position 2 was 30 yards northwest, behind the stone wall of the old root cellar foundation, a position with excellent angles on the front field and the approach to the barn. He settled in. Regulated his breathing. The chaos in the front field was significant. Men shouting. Men calling out names, trying to identify who was hit, where the shots came from. The torches were both an advantage and a disadvantage for them. They could see, but they could also be seen, and Roy could move in the dark while they were lit up like candles on a birthday cake. He identified the men giving orders, Brame, still alive, his big voice carrying over the confusion, trying to organize a charge toward the house. Roy made a professional decision. He put a .30-30 round through Brame's left leg at 200 yards. Not a killing shot. A shot designed to take the primary organizer off his feet and remove him from the tactical equation. The screaming this produced had a notable effect on morale. Men had come to this property expecting to burn a house. They had not come expecting combat. These were not soldiers. They were hardware store owners and farmers and county clerks, men accustomed to violence directed at people who could not or would not fight back. The sudden, terrible reality of a fight against an opponent they couldn't locate, couldn't count, couldn't flank, an opponent who moved silently through his own land in total darkness and shot with a precision they could not match, this reality reorganized everything they thought they knew about the night. The retreat to the trucks began within the first 12 minutes. Roy let some of them run. Let them get to the road, let them carry the wounded, because his purpose was not massacre, his purpose was defense, and the defense of his land. Every man who ran was one less problem to solve. But some men don't run. Some men, fueled by liquor and ideology and a deep, corrosive certainty that their violence had always worked before, pushed forward. Spread out. Tried to circle the house. 3 groups of them, moving through the orchards and along the fence lines, convinced that they could find the shooter, could overwhelm him by numbers. They did not find Roy George. Roy George found them. The Browning automatic rifle came out for the group moving through the pecan orchard. 7 men, creeping between the rows, torches extinguished now but moving too close together, making too much noise, stepping on dead pecan husks that snapped in the silence like small gunshots. Roy was already inside the orchard, prone between 2 thick root systems, 15 yards off the path they'd chosen, and he had been there for 4 minutes before they arrived. He was that good. He had always been that good. The army had refined it, but the gift was older. His father had noticed it when Roy was 6 years old, watching a hawk hunt a field from 500 yards and describing exactly, where the hawk would strike before it dove. That boy sees things that aren't visible yet, his father had told his mother. That's a different kind of mind. The 7 men in the orchard learned about that mind in approximately 8 seconds. Roy moved again before the echo of the bar had settled. South, toward the creek, where the second group was attempting to use the waterway as an approach, smart thinking, actually, the kind of tactical instinct that might have worked against a different defender. The creek cut a dark groove through the property, screened by willow and cypress, and if they stayed low and moved slowly they could get within 50 yards of the house without crossing open ground. What they could not know was that Roy had wired a series of simple noisemakers along the bank, fishing lines strung between stakes with tin cans containing a handful of gravel, the kind of perimeter alarm a soldier builds in the field. Not lethal. Just information. The cans rattled. Roy knew exactly where they were. He flanked them at the creek, took position 5 behind a fallen cypress trunk that had been down for years, that Roy had never moved because it made an excellent prone rest, and worked through the group with a discipline and economy that would have been remarkable even to professional soldiers. When it was done at the creek, Roy sat still for 60 seconds, listening. The night had gone quieter. Not silent, there was still noise from the road, trucks starting, men shouting, the sounds of retreat and confusion and pain. But the organized aggression had broken. The groups that had pushed inward were gone. Whatever was left of the 100 men was now in full, disorganized retreat toward the county road. Roy checked his positions. Retrieved weapons. Reloaded with the automatic efficiency of a man who has done it 10,000 times. Then he moved to position 7, the highest point on his property, a small rocky knoll at the northeast corner where he'd cut a clear angle to the road, 400 yards out. He did not want anyone to regroup at the trucks and come back. He settled behind his Springfield. He watched. The trucks did not come back. They left in a long, ragged line, headlights cutting the dark, some of them fishtailing on the dirt road in their urgency. Roy watched through his scope until the last set of taillights disappeared around the curve by the Hankins farm. He waited another 20 minutes. Then 30. The property was still. The creek murmured over its stones. An owl asked its question somewhere in the pecan orchard, received no answer, and fell silent. The cross in the front field had burned down to a smoldering stake. Roy George rose from position 7, straightened to his full height, and stood for a moment looking over his land in the deep quiet before first light. The sky to the east was not yet gray, not yet anything, but you could feel the night preparing to surrender, the particular atmospheric shift that precedes dawn by 40 minutes, perceptible only to those who've spent enough hours in the open to feel it in their skin. He was unhurt. He had not been grazed. Had not been touched. He walked the property. Took inventory. Made mental notes of what would need to be addressed in the next 24 hours. His front gate chain was cut. There was damage to a section of the east fence. The front field had a burned patch where the cross had stood. 3 of his pecan trees had been hit by stray rounds and would need evaluation by a proper arborist. The root cellar wall had taken several impacts from concentrated return fire, but the stone had held without difficulty. The house was untouched. The barn was untouched. His cattle were fine, munching grass in the north pasture, indifferent to history. Roy George went inside his kitchen, put a pot of coffee on the stove, and sat down at the table. He placed his hands flat on the wood, the same way he had when Cornelius sat across from him 2 days before, and he looked at his hands for a while, at the size of them, at the work written into them, at the life that had produced them. He was not happy. Victory was not happiness. He had known that since the Pacific, since the first time he'd felt the cold clarity of combat and come out the other side and found that whatever he expected to feel, relief, triumph, something wasn't there. There was only continuation. Only the fact of still being present in the world. He would not call the sheriff. The sheriff had been there, among the robes. He'd recognized Denton's stance, the slight left shoulder drop from an old football injury everyone in the county knew about. He would call no authority because no authority would serve him. He would do what he had always done: tend his land, maintain his fences, care for his cattle, pay his debts. He would say nothing about what had happened. He did not need to. Calhoun County would know. The survivors, however many there were, scattered now into the dark, would go home to their houses and their wives and their hardware stores and their county positions, and they would know what they had walked into, and they would carry that knowledge for the rest of their lives. They had come for Roy George in the dark, 100 of them, with fire and ropes and the deep arrogance of men who believed their cruelty had no answer. They had found the answer. Before the county road was a mile behind them, they understood something that Curtis Brame, who would spend 3 months recovering from his leg wound and never walk without a cane again, would eventually articulate to a trusted friend in a low, shaken voice, years later, when the whiskey was deep and the shame had fermented into something almost like honesty. We went out there like it was nothing. Like it was just a fat man on a piece of land. Nobody thought to ask how he got that land. How he kept it. What kind of man builds 400 acres in Calhoun County and doesn't lose it? He paused. Stared at his glass. We should have asked. The sun came up over Roy George's 412 acres like it came up every morning, indifferent, tremendous, burning away the last of the night without ceremony. Roy finished his coffee. He put on his work boots. He went out to check his cattle.